Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. At the Path 11 podcast, we are here trying to deliver leading-edge research on consciousness, healing, and metaphysics. And just like you, we are trying to answer the big questions about life. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is our purpose? We hope by listening to our podcast, it will make each day you live on Earth a little easier to understand. And now for today's podcast. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna, and I bet you are all asking, where has she been? It has been a while, people, since I have actually had the chance to podcast, find time to podcast. Mike and I are still in post-production for our after-death communication documentary that we are creating, and it's been like a 2-year process, and we're not even close to being done. But I have just some exciting news that I wanted to share because I am working on this documentary about after-death communication. It is all that I am eating, breathing, and sleeping, and I just can't get enough of it. And a few weeks ago, I was able to take an induced after-death communication training to actually learn how to use the technique. So I had interviewed someone that had co-wrote the book with Dr. Botkin, Craig Hogan, for our documentary. And I have a colleague who also got trained in this, and we were just kind of talking about induced after-death communication, and she encouraged me and was like, you know what, there's 2 spots left for the next training. Maybe you should go and take this. So I decided to take it. It's been wonderful. I have actually been using this process in my private practice, and I've been having successful induced after-death communications with people. And then I am now on a journey to find people who have actually gone through the induced after-death communication technique and see how it has changed their journey with grief. It is such an amazing protocol that I would love to shed more light on it. And I just want to kind of go over a little bit about what it is in case you've never heard it before. So Dr. Botkin is the person that you're going to want to look up. He is the one that kind of stumbled upon this during his EMDR sessions working at the VA. So induced after-death communication, this technique, what it does is it focuses on reducing the sadness associated with grief by using a modified protocol of EMDR therapy. And so clients who usually undergo this therapy and have a successful induced after-death communication, they report a significant reduction of the sadness related to the death of a loved one. And that is exactly what I'm seeing in my sessions. Now, I have a friend who, believe it or not, I actually met in a grief group that I went to after my mother had died. And so I wasn't there as a therapist. I was there as a grieving motherless daughter. And I, of course, ended up making great connections with the people who were in the group. And one connection that I stayed very connected to is my friend Sandy. And so Sandy and I, we kind of instantly clicked when we met each other at this grief group. We kind of felt like if our mothers knew each other, they would be friends. And then we found out we live like 15 minutes from each other. So we get a chance when we're not so busy to see each other, sometimes go for a walk and just catch up. And we just have the best conversations ever. And Sandy had told me that she did an IADC session. She did sessions with her therapist. And this was before I got trained. And her stories, I mean, I could have Sandy on our podcast multiple times because when you hear this girl's stories of the communication that she has had with her mom, who is in spirit, they are just like mind-bending. So I'm so glad that she's here today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her. And this episode is going to be about hearing firsthand from somebody who has been a client and went through this induced after-death communication protocol to make contact with her mother and really begin to heal the core sadness of her grief. So my guest today is Sandy Ferguson, and she is from the southern end of the Great Sacandaga Lake. She is currently pursuing her MSW, which is Master in Social Work, and is immersed in the field of working full-time in human services right now. She has a lovely daughter who is the cutest little thing alive. So she's also a mom and loves her huge, big English Mastiff and is also a nature lover. She is kind of like into all things like I am. I know that she has been a listener of the podcast She also trained in Reiki with me and came and did a Reiki training. And she just loves the metaphysical concepts. And this is a woman who, once she finally gets her degree as a social worker, is going to help a lot of people. So I'm so excited to have her on this podcast. Hi, Sandy. Say hello to the Path 11 podcast audience. So glad you're here today. And I can't wait to talk about you and your mom and just relive some of these stories with you. So I thought maybe where we could begin is just hearing a little bit about your mom and your relationship with her, and kind of maybe bring us to the story of, what happened when your mom was diagnosed with her illness that eventually led to her death.
Sure. So my mom was a young mom, and we were pretty close, typical mother-daughter relationship. And let's see, I guess I could back it up to the summer of 2018. She started to have some pretty serious health complications, and we knew that just something wasn't right with her. She bounced from hospital to hospital out in central New York, ultimately ending up at Upstate University Hospital, where they discovered she had stage 4 advanced adenocarcinoma, which is essentially stomach cancer. It went undetected because it started growing within the lining of her stomach. So it wasn't noticed for such a long time. And by the time they did find it, it had already invaded her pancreas and nearby lymph nodes. And it took a while to reach that diagnosis. So she was ailing for quite a bit. Then I would say in about 2020, things started to rapidly decline for her. She had exhausted all treatment options. It was really heartbreaking. Nobody wants to face their own mortality like that and just have the anticipatory grief and the anxiety of what's going to happen, how is this going to happen, and all of this just not knowing, and everything just completely out of everyone's control, just taking each day as it comes. Fortunately, my mom was a spiritual person in the same way that I am, and she was really comfortable having difficult conversations with my brother and I. So, she wasn't avoiding the elephant in the room. She was talking about her death and what her wishes were. So as hard as that was, it was also really comforting and just in a way provided us with reassurance, I guess, in a strange way. It was the most difficult situation I've ever been through, but at the same time, we all felt at peace with it based on our conversations with her. And then on, October 28th, 2020, she received her final prognosis and was in the hospital for a bit of time just so they could establish some comfort care for her. And then on her birthday, November 13th, she was able to come home, and she moved into my grandmother's house, where that's 10 minutes from me. And we were able to just spend every day together until she ultimately died on January 14th. And in that moment that she died, I was with her, and the night before, I had been with her the previous day, and she was saying, my daughter started to act a little bit out of sorts, just not herself. She was tired and exhausted, and I could tell something beyond what I could understand was making my child unsettled, and knew that I needed to bring her home. And my mom had said, well, when do you think you'll be back tomorrow? And I said, oh, probably, between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. I'll come over first thing. And she said, okay. And I gave her a hug and a kiss, told her I loved her. And the next morning I woke up at about 5:45. And in my heart, I just knew that that was the day. I don't know how I knew, but I felt it in my bones. And I got dressed and I told my husband, I'm leaving our daughter with you today. And I know that I need to go by myself. And about 10 minutes after that, my aunt had called. My aunt stayed with her that night and said, your mom has slipped into a comatose state. I think you need to get over here right away. And I said, well, I'm already on my way out the door. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And when I got there, she was comfortable. And it was the first day in probably the length of her illness that I didn't see pain on her face. And that was huge. And I knew, as heartbreaking as this was, that in that moment, she was experiencing peace. And I was just holding her hand and talking to her. And I let her know that I kept saying, I'll help you through this, Mom. It'll be okay. I'm going to help you through this. And my brother was calling. And as my brother called, she opened her eyes and grabbed a hold of my arm to pull herself up. And I was amazed that this was happening and completely in shock. And she was trying to speak, but she couldn't form words. And then she just immediately laid back down. And I was like, oh my God, that was incredible. And then a couple minutes passed and she was looking at me, making eye contact. And she just took a last breath and that was it. It was in that moment, it's so hard to articulate the sensations that I felt as she died. Obviously, it was overwhelming sadness and immediate grief and just weeping and heartache. But at the same time, I knew that her physical body was done, but her energy very much still existed. And I knew that.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to put into words, right? That visceral feeling, of that moment and still feeling her alive, just not in that physical body.
Yes.
Yeah. And remind me again, Mom's name?
Rose.
Rose. I always like to speak their name as well. So that happened on January 14th of 2021.
Yes.
Yeah. And how old were you?
I was 29.
29. So fast forward, 3 years now. So you're in your 30s now, right?
Yeah.
In your 30s. Okay. And so from 2018 to 21, your mom kind of was dealing with this stomach cancer in the hospitals. And then, like you had said, with her already foundation in spirituality, she was able to begin to speak to her wishes, even though, like you said, that was so hard, but can also bring those who are alive a little comfort, because it almost seems like the person who is dying has accepted this themselves and now is able to speak about what they want. And not everybody gets that, experience. So Mom then passes, and it does sound like you had a beautiful moment with her that, her eyes were open, you were making contact, you were there, you were present, for the death, and then feeling, just like you said, having this experience and remembering the feeling. So that feeling that's hard to put into words sounds to me like that kind of began to carry you through as you entered into your grief journey, with the loss of your mom. And being that you're already a spiritual person, I'm sure when you kind of heard about this technique of induced after death communication, you were probably one of those people sign me up. I'm ready.
Absolutely.
But before you did that, I'm sure you were doing some therapy, right? Because we must have met each other. It had to have been in 21 or 22 for that grief group in the fall.
22.
It was 22? Okay. Fall of 22. Yeah. So maybe walk me through a little bit of, what was grief? What was your grief therapy or grief processing like? Like, why did you decide to get into therapy? And clearly you're going to become a therapist. So clearly you're open to the whole situation, but would kind of like to hear a little bit of, how the therapy process maybe helped leading up to these IADC sessions.
Sure. So after she died, I fell into this routine of, on to the next thing, going through the motions. And then I was about, I don't know, maybe 2 months out after she died, not even. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And also I was stuck in a pattern of avoidance. I can see that now. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to go get a new job. So I ended up getting a new job in Malta, and I started working and again continued on to the next thing, And reflecting on that time period now, I really can say that I was foggy. Like I was going through the motions and I was in this like dense grief fog, which I learned was completely a normal thing to experience. And it got to the point where about a year later, just after a year in February of 22, it all came crashing down once we hit that year mark. And I felt back like I was back at square one on the day that she died. And I was consumed by my grief. And I knew that I needed to seek services with a therapist to process that and to allow myself to comfortably sit with my grief and lean into it instead of avoiding it. So I started going to therapy sessions, and maybe a couple months in, my therapist had suggested, there's this thing called IADC. And based off of what you've shared with me about your grief experience and your mom, and even these little signs and connections that I had already been receiving from my mom, she had suggested that I might want to look into it and consider it. So I learned more about it. I did my own little bits of research, and I was like, you know what? My mom was a spiritual person, and she was into reading about different metaphysical concepts and mediumship. And I was like, if I do this, I know that my mom is going to be the one to really make her presence known, because not only is this up my alley, it's up her alley too. So
right.
Prepare my mom and I to do this.
Sure. Yeah. The two of you definitely, I think, had that going for you. So before we get to the IADC sessions and what that was like, to go through, do you want to tell a couple of stories of maybe the signs that your mom was giving you, prior or after? Because you have some extraordinary stories. I do want you at some point to tell about the Russian doll one, because I am still blown away by that.
I am also blown away by that.
God.
Every time my husband picks them up and says, "This is just crazy." And I'm like, I know that
it so is. But, so do you want to tell maybe just a couple of stories there, after mom had passed, of how she was trying to communicate with you through certain signs?
Sure. Well, immediately after she died, I remember talking to one of my close friends, and she was concerned for me and was worried about, me taking care of myself and getting adequate rest. And I said, well, actually, sleep isn't something that I'm worried about. I know many people, while they're grieving, are sleepless and can't rest. I was like, but actually, I find so much comfort in it, because I know in my sleep is where I'll see my mom. And she was consistently present in my dreams right away. So that was very comforting. And also, I would say maybe a month after she died, I needed to take my daughter for a consultation for some dental work. And I was a little nervous about it. It was the biggest, health thing my daughter had ever experienced. And she was little, she was 3. So I was nervous about it. And it had just snowed the night before. So I went outside to start my car and get my daughter into her booster seat. And there was a single cardinal feather on freshly fallen snow right next to my car. And I looked at it, and my daughter looked at it at the same time, and she picked it up and handed it to me and said, "This is from Granny's Angels." And I was thinking it, and she said it, and I was blown away. There's this poem that I had heard years ago, "When feathers appear, your angels are near." And I had never shared that with my daughter. So for her to pick up this cardinal feather and say that, I was like, "You beautiful little child, you have no idea how amazing this is."
Right. And she's 3, right? She's three years old from the mouths of babes. Yeah.
Yes. So that was just amazing. And I knew it. I knew that that was from my mom. So that was very comforting for me, and especially the timing of it. Fast forward a couple of months later was my daughter's 4th birthday, and I was just really sad and weepy that day because my mom adored my daughter and always made a big deal out of her birthdays. And I knew that she would have been there that day. So I was just kind of stuck in my feelings. And at the end of the day, my daughter had played in our backyard with a little dollhouse and her Barbies. And I went to my backyard to pick up her toys and put them away. And when I did, there were 4 feathers in the dollhouse. And it was her 4th birthday.
Wow.
I was like, "You're amazing, Mom. I know this is you." And again, another few months down the line, my daughter was starting preschool. So we went for her pre-K orientation. And it was just one of those milestone things where my mom would have been so proud. And on the way out of the school, there was a perpendicular intersection in the sidewalk, and there's a little bit of mud on the ground, and stuck in the mud was this white feather right outside the school. And I was, "Thank you. I know you're here." Oh,
Amazing.
So yeah, just lots of feathers at really uncanny time.
Yeah. I mean, you have stories for days about feathers, but they also correlate with these moments in time when you're needing your mom, or there's like really big events going on in your life. And you are the only person that I know that gets cardinal feathers. Guys, Sandy has like a collection of red feathers. I live 15 minutes from her. I collect feathers too whenever I see them. I have yet in all of my years have seen a cardinal feather, been able to pick it up. They are like, she's the only person that I know that finds cardinal feathers everywhere. I have a cardinal that keeps coming to my bird feeder. I'm like, "Drop me a feather. I just want one. I just want one." I get the blue jay feathers. I get the ravens, the hawks, the little chickadee ones, never a cardinal. And so like, I'm always fascinated when you text me a picture of a cardinal feather that you find, because it's like, of course, there she goes again. It's so specific, and your mom just seems to like have perfect timing when you're discovering these. So let's leave the Russian doll story for the end of our podcast, because it's a mind bender for sure. So as mom passes, you're kind of getting these signs, 4 feathers on your daughter's 4th birthday, that cardinal feather, there you go. She started it, right, with your daughter going to the doctors and stuff. So there's probably like a sense of comfort, like, okay, I feel my mom, connecting with her. And then you get ready to do this induced after death communication session. So you guys are going to keep hearing me say IADC. It's a lot shorter to do. And so why don't you take us through that of what that was like for you?
Sure. So I knew going into it that it was going to be over the course of 2 days, back-to-back sessions. And it was my understanding that going into it that I really would be tapping into the heart of my grief, that deepest part, really with that raw, visceral sadness. And I was prepared to do that. So we started on the first day and it was hard. I felt every emotion that I had felt up until that point in my grief journey. I felt it then and there. It was as difficult as it was and emotionally exhausting as it was. There was also this source of comfort of having this empathetic, kind facilitator holding space for me as I worked through that. And that was, reflecting on it now, was to have that presence and support in the process of it was a huge deal. And we continued with that. At some point, we listened to voicemails from my mom that I had saved on my phone and just playing through memories and experiences with her, just really deeply connecting with her. And then that was at the end of the first day. I went home and I was having really wild dreams that night. And so that was pretty cool. And then the following day, I went in and we started out, and suddenly I just felt this wave of calm. And at first I was like, what is this? Like, am I doing this the right way? I was still kind of stuck in my head. And my facilitator was like, lean into it, go with the flow and just, feel these feelings, see where it takes you. So I did. And that sense of calm really started to just, I guess, like overtake me. It was a really dramatic change from being incredibly sad and weepy to this just a complete shift in my state. And as I began to sit with that, I started noticing different sensations. And I frequently kept pausing the process, looking for validation and reassurance, saying, am I crazy? Like, is this really happening? Like, kept thinking, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And there's no supposed to. It's just, going, it's it. And I noticed there was it felt like a breeze or a draft almost. And so I'm like, probably like an air vent in the ceiling. And I'm like looking around, oh, there's no air vents in here. Okay. And it also felt like just a touch, like at the top of my back, the bottom of my neck. Like it felt like a physical touch was there, like a hand. And I was like shaking that off, like, oh, maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. And then I got this strong scent of my mom's perfume, Dolce & Gabbana Light Blue. And I was like, am I imagining this? And so I looked over and was like, do you notice this? And she noticed it too, which was wild to me, but also very validating. So I closed my eyes and continued with just leaning into this process. And I began to feel this sensation that I was underwater, like felt like my ears had popped and plugged, and like if I was underwater looking towards the surface and there was light glimmering on the surface of the water. And that just struck me as very odd. And at that moment, I was like, I don't know why I'm feeling this or why this is significant, but this just is what it is. And I suddenly had this realization that my mom was truly present with me always. And as I was replaying this scene of her dying when she grabbed my arm to try to speak, I just got this image of her saying, "I'm not going anywhere," as if those were the words she was trying to say at that moment. I was like, hush, she's right. She's not going anywhere. I know she's still here. So we ended that session and I thought it was incredible, not knowing that my IADC experience was not ending right there. So I just felt this overwhelming comfort and really just validation. And I left. And on my drive home, I was like, wow, this is really intense. I can't go home right now. I need to go someplace to sit with this because I can feel I'm not done with this. I need to go be by myself and really process this experience because it was amazing. And on my way home, I was going to go to a local town beach. And I was like, actually, I'm going to go to the beach where I used to go with my mom instead. So did a little pivot and went to a different section of the lake. And there's a little path you have to walk down to get down to the beach. And as I was walking down, I could feel my mom. I don't know how else I can describe it other than, if your eyes are closed and you're like half asleep, but somebody comes in their room and they're trying to be quiet. Like, even though your eyes are closed, you still know they're in there. It resembled that sort of sensation. Like I felt like she was there. So as I'm walking down this path, I said, "Mom, if you're here, please give me a feather. Give me a black feather if you're here." And about 10 feet in front of me, I look and there's a single black feather on the ground in front of me. And I was burst into tears. And I was like, oh my gosh, like so full of gratitude. So I picked it up and I'm just holding it, looking at it and thinking, wow, this is incredible. And I continued down the path and I get to the beach. And as I'm looking at the water, the sun is perfectly in the spot where it's hitting the surface and it's glimmering, and the sound of like the trickle and the retreat of the water resembled what I was hearing during my session. And it came back to me as, I felt like I was underwater and I could see the light glimmering on the surface. And I was like, she wanted me to come here. This is where she wanted to meet me. This is where she wanted me to be. And I looked around and there were feathers all over the place. The beach was littered with feathers of all colors. They were gray, they were white, they were tan, they were black, all over the place. And I was just picking them up and just thinking about how incredible it was and to feel her there. And I fell to my knees. I was weeping, but it wasn't so much sadness. It was everything. And just to know that she was there with me and that I could, through this IADC could, heed to her request to meet her at the beach, to meet her at the lake. It was really profound. And I collected myself and my feathers and I was walking back to my car. And as I was walking back, there is a monarch butterfly that was perfectly in sync with me walking just down the path next to me. I snapped a picture of it because I was like, you're walking me back to my car.
Well, and when you think about the butterfly of transformation, the butterfly always represents transformation. That's pretty cool too and significant.
Yeah.
It's almost like marking your transformation in this whole, journey that you were having and, almost like finishing it, because like you were like, after this IADC, I'm not done yet. I just need to process this and be with it. And then to have the symbol of the butterfly walk you back.
Yes.
Oh my God, that is so beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah. And really cool that in your session, you're like, why am I underwater? Why am I seeing this? And not really, it just seems like, okay, yeah, this happened and didn't think much of it afterwards. But once you got to that body of water, it came together. Now, I might be getting your story confused with another person's story. Were you also wearing your mom's ashes during your IADC?
I was.
Okay, because I thought you told me this one time in our walk. So, but this is pretty significant too of what happened.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So during the IADC, just that the realization of, she wasn't going anywhere, that she was always with me. I had been wearing this necklace that had her ashes in it. And I felt so compelled to immediately take it off because I was like, I don't need this to know that she is with me. She is not this necklace of ashes. She is everywhere. And it was just this profound realization. And I knew I didn't need it. So I took it off, and at the lake, I left the necklace in the water.
Wow. Oh, okay. Yeah. And that's pretty profound too, because, a lot of times having like this transitional object, can be helpful. Like I have a ring that my mom wore when she died, and so like I have that with me. And so like wearing your mom's ashes is probably that thing that like grounded you, kept you comfort. Like, okay, I have my mom with me always. And then you go through this IADC session and her coming to you and saying like, I am everywhere. I'm always with you. Almost seemed like it shifted something in your knowing that it's not just the necklace. Like she's like always here. It didn't like her presence in your life didn't need to be attached to just the necklace with her ashes anymore. It became bigger. Yeah. Wow. Amazing. So after you had this session, the goal of this therapy is really to address the primary loss that people feel of feeling that disconnect, from their loved ones. The secondary losses, can still remain. Like every time your daughter has a birthday, you'll feel that, wishing that your mom was there and these monumental moments in your life. Those are kind of the secondary losses that we still work through, but really addressing the profound sadness and moving that energy, because everything is energy, and being able to almost like transform that frequency of sadness really seems to be the key in what propels people to really enter a totally different state of their grief journey. So how do you feel you changed as kind of a person after this type of session and having this communication and these experiences with your mom to maybe like where you are now? Do you feel like that put you into a different place on your grief journey?
Absolutely. I often say that IADC experience was a catalyst for me. That is the only way I can describe that. I felt like it opened Pandora's box for me, so to speak. After that, I just began this really intense, I guess, spiritual transformation and just personal growth that I wasn't even planning on. And it just, everything sort of happened and fell into place. And it's amazing. I've been doing a lot of writing, and I actually, I wrote a poem called The Catalyst just to really articulate and remember how this whole experience just set me in this path of forward motion to expand. And it's been incredible. I've done, my Reiki training, obviously. I've had great success with the job that I got after my mom died. The personal connections and friendships that I have formed are otherworldly, they feel like, and also a lot of comfort with leaning into my own spirituality and just growing and blossoming there. So it's been really special.
And then deciding to go to school to become a social worker.
Going to school, yes. Saying, yeah, oh, this is right for me. And it does. It feels so right. And it all transpired from there.
Yeah, it feels like, in my experience, because I have gone through my own IADC, and now I've had the opportunity to do it with a few people and know you and a couple of other people that have had, the experience. And yours kind of sound like it really catapulted you, like almost unfroze you in a sense,
Absolutely.
Like grief can just freeze us, paralyze us. It just is really hard to move forward. What do I want to do with my life? Who am I now? How do I function after this? And it just really feels like it took off those weighted boots that maybe you were in and like put on your Supergirl cape and you started to fly. It doesn't mean that you don't get sad, or miss your mom, but it just seems like something really big shifted for you. Did this experience at all, did you always want to become a therapist, or did this experience and your experience of therapy interest you more in wanting to become a social worker?
I did not always want to become a therapist. It was something I had known that, throughout my life and my time I've spent in education, that I wanted to be in the field of helping people. And I sort of found, after reflecting on it, that I was in this 10-year cyclic pattern of growth and exploring things. And I found myself working in the field of human services. And I was like, wow, this really feels right for me. And then I began working with my therapist, and I was just like, wow, everything that I'm learning and that I'm gaining here, like, I just feel so compelled to reciprocate that and share what I'm learning, what I continue to learn with others. And just this, then with the IADC and the other pieces of growth that I've experienced, it really has further cemented, yeah, this is what I'm meant to do. And all of these things are pointing me in that direction and validating that, this is the path for me of what I'm supposed to be doing.
I love it. I love it so much. And hopefully once you go through your training, you're going to get trained in EMDR or some, other therapy that allows you to get trained in IADC. And maybe you'll become trained in this and help us, because we're planning for 2025 some intensive retreats for people who would like to be a client. There's a screening that people have to go through to make sure that they would be appropriate to go through this. So like not everybody is ready to go through this type of process. And one of the things that made you ready was the willingness and the ability to want to be able to feel and address your core sadness. And a lot of people will avoid that because it feels like it could be too overwhelming. But that is the key. That is the key with this. And so, we're going to be holding some retreats. We just went and saw a beautiful facility out in Lake George. So in March, we're going to be planning an intensive retreat for 4 people to go through it as well. And then we're going to be looking to train like clinicians and let them know about this type of therapy that is out there. We don't do the training, but there's another person that we'll connect clinicians with. So really excited to just really bring this out to the world and let people know more about it. Now, Sandy and I also have another crazy connection story that I want her to share before she shares the Russian doll story. And so this was, for those of you maybe who are just tuning into the Path 11 podcast, have no idea who I am or my story or listen to any previous episodes. My mom passed on October 19th of 2019, and the ring that she was wearing at the time of her death said "Shine On." And in the inside of this ring, it was inscribed, "The world needs your beautiful light." So my mother's sign to me has been shine on, shine bright, things of that sort. And this was something that I shared in the grief group. And I don't even know how this happened, Sandy. You're going to have to tell me. But one day, it was like during our grief group, or maybe a year after, I'm not sure. Sandy,
during the aura painting class.
Oh, during an aura painting class. Sandy ends up going through her social media Instagram account, I think, for some reason. And on October 19th of 2019, she had posted a "Shine On" quote or something like that, right? And she took a screenshot.
It was the year before. It was oddly the year before. I believe it was 2018 was the one my post was from.
Okay, but it was on the 9th. Okay,
yeah. October 19th, 2018. And it was a picture of my daughter in a little baby onesie that had a feather on it, and it said "Free Spirit." And my caption under the photo, I wrote, "Shine on, beautiful one. The world needs your light." And how outrageous, right?
Yeah, we don't.
And then that day, I was scrolling through and I was like, "April, I have to show this to you." And we were both blown away.
Yeah, to this day, I don't even know what to say about that. So she posts this a year before my mom dies, on my mom's anniversary to the day, a year before. And she has it quoted exactly what is on my ring, verbatim. It's not like it was verbatim of that. And then here we are in 2022, right? Meeting each other. Look at that synchronicity. What are the chances of that? And that is just so wild to me and so cool. It gave me chills, still gives me chills to this day when I think about that and having that text come in. I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, another really cool, mind-blowing story is this Russian doll story that you guys have to hear. And maybe this will be the story that we'll kind of end with. So, my hope is in you guys meeting Sandy that you will, one, get some courage with your own grief journey, and kind of lean into her story to know that you can get on the other side and really beautiful things can happen when you're ready to address the core sadness of your grief. I hope some of you who are skeptical and kind of hear some of these stories of Sandy will say, maybe there's something to this. And I also hope that you'll just feel really warm in your heart, especially after you hear this Russian doll story. It's amazing. And hopefully it will bend your mind a little bit too. So tell them what happened here with the Russian dolls.
So back in the 90s, one of my cousins was traveling as an arm wrestler, and he went to Russia and came back with this set of Russian nesting dolls for my mom. And so she always had them, and she always kept them on display in a little cabinet or on a shelf wherever she lived. And, we always knew they came from Benji and they were special to her. And when she died, I had those dolls and I wanted to give them to my daughter. And she knew that they were from Granny and they belonged to her, and Granny's cousin gave them to her. So the one day she had them out, and this is back in February of this year.
Yeah.
So my daughter had the dolls out in my living room and she was playing with them. She briefly walked away from them, went back into the living room, and I heard this blood-curdling scream. And I went in and my daughter's sobbing, and here's my giant English Mastiff chomping away on these Russian nesting dolls. And I was so upset. I started crying. My daughter's crying. My husband comes running downstairs, not knowing what he's like, "What are you doing?" So I managed to get all the pieces away from my dog, and there were two left. that he didn't get a hold of. So I'm like, all right, we're going to have to throw away these pieces, but we have these other two. And my daughter was so sad. And I was sad because of the emotional attachment we have to these Russian nesting dolls. And I was like, well, at least we have these two. We'll put them in our display cabinet in the dining room so that they can stay safe. And, we'll have to go on from here. A couple of days later, I was in Queensbury and my husband and I were looking for a new dining room table, but to fit the aesthetic of our dining room, we wanted an antique table. So we were searching different antique stores. And there's this very large antique store in Queensbury. It's this huge building and it is 3 floors of different antique vendors in all of these rooms throughout this building. And I walked inside of this building and in the back of my mind, I can hear Russian nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls. And I'm like, well, it's probably just on my mind because, this just happened over the weekend. So I'm walking through looking at various things and it's so persistent. So I acknowledged it and I'm like, okay, Mom, I hear you. Russian nesting dolls. All right, I'll look. And I continued around, went through the first floor, didn't find a table, didn't find Russian nesting dolls, went to the second floor, again, looked around, not too much that piqued my interest. Up on the third floor, and on the third floor, there's a lot of like holiday themed rooms. And I was like, well, this isn't really going to be it today. I'm not going to find a table here. And, maybe my mom's just whispering in my ear, like letting me know she knew what happened to the dolls. And there was one last room for me to go into. And I walk in there and there's this cabinet with 3 tiers that fold out. And on the top, there were like 9 sets of Russian nesting dolls. And they were these bold, vivid, bright colors. And I was like, oh my gosh, how crazy that I'm like, catching this Russian nesting dolls and I see all these dolls here. That's amazing. So I walk over and I start to look through and all of a sudden I pick up this set that is nearly identical to the hand-carved, hand-painted set my mom had received as a gift. So similar. The set she had was not painted really. It was a wood-burned set and it had some gold metallic paint around the head and the eyes and lips were painted. And in the set that I found, it was similar in size and a wood burn set. It was not painted except for the gold around the head and the lips. And I could not believe the resemblance between the two. It's just incredible. So I knew I needed to buy it.
For sure.
Yeah. I got this memo. I got it loud and clear. So all teary-eyed, I go down to pay for my set of Russian nesting dolls and I brought them home and I kept them wrapped in a paper bag and I handed it to my daughter and gave it to her and she opened it up and her eyes were so big. She was like, oh my goodness, Grin wanted you to find these. I was like, you're right. She did.
Right. And the last room, right? I mean, you could have turned around and not did the last room. And then when you texted me a picture of them, if you still have that picture,
yeah,
because Sandy sent me a text. She's like, you're never going to believe this. Like she told me the story in person. I think we bumped into each other, told me the story. And I was like, well, you got to send me a picture. She sends me a picture. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And it's like, I hear the story, I'm like, wow, well, that's really unique. But then when you see the picture of how similar it is, I mean, what are the chances? Like you said, there were 9 sets of very vibrant colors, but then the one. And I mean, they looked identical. It was so amazing. I mean, I just love your stories. I always tell Sandy, I hope you're writing these down. You're going to write a book someday because like seeing a feather and thinking of your loved one. Yeah, we know that, they communicate with us through pennies and dimes and feathers and songs and stuff like this. But Sandy's story, every time she's like, okay, you ready for this? I got a story. I'm like, I am ready because they're so intense, and they're these stories that, one woman said, like, without a shadow of a doubt, it's like, these are these holy cow moments. I can't explain this away. The timing of it, just all of these cardinal feathers, mom's, I need a black feather, and up ahead, there it is. I mean, it's just they're so profound. It's not just like random feathers that are happening or like random Russian dolls that you find. They're just phenomenal. So listen, you can come on our podcast anytime, save up your stories, and maybe we'll do like a Sandy Saturday or something and have you on as an episode, because I know that your mom is going to continue to be active of part of your life. I mean, they all are, right? They're with us always. And I love that you and your mom are so open. I think that's a huge thing. Like my mom and I communicate a lot too. And I think when both lines of communication are open, we tend to have them a little more regularly. It just kind of feels like, oh yeah, all right, there's my mom. Yeah, oh hey, thanks, mom.
I jokingly say she's a better communicator in spirit than in physical realm.
My mom too. I totally relate to that. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for agreeing to do this, for being so brave and sharing your story, talking about your mom, Rose, and letting us know, kind of like giving us a little glimpse inside your therapy sessions of what it's like, because I think this is a new therapy and it can be hard for people, to want to share such personal details of what they've gone through. And I really appreciate your bravery to come on and want to be able to share this literally with the world, because people from all over the world listen to our podcast. And there are IADC therapists trained all over the world as well. And so I'm really excited to begin to bring this series onto the Path 11 podcast. I'm going to be recording a couple of more. I found a couple of other people who are willing to come on and talk about their IADC experience. And I am going to be on with a fellow colleague for a couple of episodes for us to kind of go a little more in depth about this topic and conversation, and also tell you about our upcoming retreats and intensives that we will have. And for those of you that are listening and you want to travel to New York, we found a beautiful retreat center in Lake George, New York, where we are pretty sure, we're just waiting on the pricing, that this is where we're going to hold these retreats. So again, it feels really good to be back podcasting, just connecting with all of you guys again. I'm still here. It's just been really busy. Mike's been busy. We're both working full-time jobs, trying to figure life out like all of you are, and yet try to get you some really good episodes out here for you to get more excited about death and not to be afraid of it. So again, Sandy, thank you so much. It was lovely speaking with you, and I hope all of you really enjoyed this episode. If you are listening and you have sat across from an IADC therapist and have actually gone through this and had a really profound story, please email me, april@path11productions.com. I would love to hear about it and would love to interview you. So thank you all again for listening, and I hope to bring you another episode very soon. So take care, everyone, and take good care of yourselves. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. If you haven't already, please subscribe and rate and review the Path 11 podcast in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, this podcast is made possible by our sponsor, Path 11 TV. Visit path11tv.com to start a 7-day free trial and start streaming over 100 hours of exclusive video content on consciousness, healing, and life after death. That's path11tv.com, and be sure to use coupon code podcast30 to take 30% off your annual membership. Start satisfying your spiritual curiosity with a membership to Path 11 TV today. Bye for now.